I'm just going to jump in here. This is our application that you're seeing on the screen. The device is USB powered, just plugs into your USB port. What you're going to want to do is navigate up to your Apple menu and click on BodyView and you're going to scroll down to Preferences and just click on Preferences. I just want you to make sure that you've got a check mark placed in both the Show Names and Client List box as well as this beginner mode. They probably are by default, but just to be sure, then we're going to click OK. All right. So navigating through the software is fairly simple, really. Your success with the BodyMetrix really boils down to two different facets: technique with the device, and then performing some common sense minor analysis. So I'm going to walk you through the most efficient way to do this. So notice on the screen, we've got three different icons. We can create a new student athlete profile. This middle icon, we can open up profiles for reassessment or perhaps to look at saved data. And then we have a demonstration mode here. So the very first thing that you're going to want to do is create that profile for your athlete. So we're just going to click on that icon. And guys, it's basic data entry. You're just going to plug in their first name, their last name, this optional ID field, as well as the email address field over here on the right. Those are some options that our developer left in from our pro software. You do want to get a birth date. I find that the easiest way to do this is just highlight these fields and type the birth date in accordingly. Any female wrestlers with your programs?
Usually have one or two.
Okay, couple. Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. You're going to make a selection accordingly with the drop down here. So you choose between male and female. And then you get to athletic type. So I want to take a minute to talk about this because it's been a source of confusion to some degree with some of the schools that I've trained. Athletic type pertains solely to excess abdominal fat. Okay, that's your consideration. When you're looking at your wrestler, you're focused on how much excess fat they're carrying in the abdomen. Don't overthink this. Most of your kids are going to fall into the default category, which simply means they are carrying excess fat. I'll use myself as an example. I could rip off a good chunk of fat here, pinch an inch, so to speak. Certainly those kids would fall into default. The lean category, your super flyweights would be a good example. Really skinny kids, 130 pounds soaking wet, no fat in the abdomen to speak of, very thin. Also kids that exhibit definition there, they don't necessarily have to have six-pack abs. That's not the end-all be-all. Certainly that kid is going to fall into that lean category. So I would suggest for the time being, don't overthink this thing. Either they're super lean, everybody else you could categorize as default. I will provide more clarity for you as to exactly how that setting affects the software. And it's really just a predictive element within the software when we perform an abdominal measurement. It predicts the fat thickness. Regarding group, if you were working with multiple schools, you do have the ability to categorize people into various groups. You also have the option to put people into a new group, perhaps next year. You can recategorize your athletes into a group. You just simply type in the name of that group here. You could leave it blank if it's solely your school that you're working with, and then maybe at the end of the season you want to recategorize them for 2021. And I'm going to show you how to do that as we move forward. Obviously, we're in the US, so we're using pounds and inches. And then you want to get a weight and a height. The questions come up a lot. Can I pre-populate or create these profiles before the actual test? So the answer to that is yes. You know, you'd still need to input a birth date. If you did pre-populate the info, you do want to still put in a mock weight and height in order for the profile to take and be created. When we go to open up that profile for the actual assessment, I'm going to show you here in a minute where you would input the current date. We'll talk about reporting for track wrestling as we move forward. But again, basic data entry, once you've got all that plugged in, you're going to click Create. Let's say we entered this data, we click Create. I'm actually going to move you over here. We're going to talk about demonstration mode for a minute. Demo mode allows you to kind of play around with the software without creating a profile. Test it out, get a feel for it. When you click on demo mode, you've got the same parameters here. We can enter age, weight. I'll just type in a couple mock values here. We'll click continue. So I actually brought you here to demo mode because it's easier for me to change gender and talk about formula selection. But when we click create profile, this is the exact same tab that it brings us to. Guys, you can see up at the top, we have our various tabs that contain various functions and features. We were just on our home screen, created that profile. When you click create, it brings us immediately to this very same measure tab. Now for male athletes, we're going to be performing 3 site point measurements. Over here on the left, you see our points list with those various site points along with our fat thickness values. The first one we're going to measure is the tricep. So what's nice about the software, we got this question mark, and we can pull up illustrations for each of the points that we're going to be measuring. Okay, we're going to talk about technique and how to measure. I'm going to actually walk you through it. For males, we're going to be measuring tricep, scapula, and waist. For females, interestingly enough, we're only measuring 2 site points. And I apologize, you probably were already privy to that. But for female athletes, we're just measuring their tricep and their scapula. Any questions about formulas between genders? With that said, I'm going to walk you through the process. We're going to go back here to our home screen for a minute. Let's pretend that we did pre-populate the data. We would go here to this middle icon, which is open profile. Super simple. We're going to click on that. There's a couple ways that you can do this. I find that the easiest way is to type in the last name of the student, for example, and then click search for profile. And provided you've only got 1 student that has that last name in the database, we're ready to roll. The other way that you could do it is if you click open profile and you just click this search for profile button, you can select the client or the athlete from the string here. So if you've got multiple individuals with the same last name, we would just make our selection accordingly. So I'm going to click John Test, and we're ready to measure. So the first thing that you should be mindful of if you pre-populated the data, now we want to make sure at the time of assessment we input their actual weight. So up here at the top left, we see a field box here for weight. We also see one for height. So you definitely want to make sure you do that first. My understanding is that New Jersey is still doing a urine-specific gravity test this year. Here's a field box where you could input the value. It's optional. Has no bearing whatsoever on the actual results when we calculate percent body fat. But if you did want to look at trending with that value, there's a way that we can look at data. We're going to talk about that a bit later in this Trends tab. I would write a heading on your notepad that says device technique at measurement site points, device technique at measurement site points. And you might underline that. So device technique and measurement site points, there's 4 things underneath that heading that are really imperative to ensuring accuracy with this system. Number 1 is angles at the site point are important. Number 1 would be angles at each site point are important. What do I mean by that? Well, and I realize my forearm is not a site point, but it would be applicable any site that you measure. You want the device to be flush and perpendicular, really at a 90-degree angle if at all possible. If it's pointed or tilted funny as you're measuring, that could cause fluctuation with the ultrasound signal when we go to measure. So number one would be angles at the sight point are important, flush and perpendicular, or at a 90 at the skin surface. Notice there's a question mark next to this measure point button. So if we click on that again, it brings up a good reference. So the red dot, guys, coincides really with the head of the device. Same thing, that's the point. So number two is there's an optimal area of movement above and below that sight point. Optimal area of movement above and below that red dot or that sight point. It's a 1/2 inch max. Optimal area of movement, 1/2 inch max above and below the point. And I'm going to go through each measurement and guide you through the process. But the mistake that I see folks making, unfortunately, when they're measuring these sites, they're using way too much movement. That's problematic. You have a small area at the point that you're working with. You don't want to exceed more than 1/2 inch above, back through the point, and below it. That's important. Now note, for the tricep measurement, it's really a vertical measurement. It's up and down there. The scapula, as well as the waist, is a side-to-side movement with the device. Tricep is vertical, scap and waist are side-to-side movements there. Okay. Number three, and this is an easy one, firm pressure is okay. Believe it or not, firm pressure at the sight points is okay. You do want to apply some pressure. It does not compress the subcutaneous fat layer that we're after here. You don't want to be ginger at these points and just barely place the device on the skin. Okay, and lastly, the duration of each measurement is 3 to 4 seconds tops. Duration of each measurement, 3 to 4 seconds tops. It's a really quick reading, as you'll see here. Those 4 bullet points or numbers, really important. That's half the battle when it comes to getting accurate results with our system. I'm going to speak to the other facet here shortly. If you guys are feeling okay, I'm going to guide you through the process. And I apologize, some of this is a little redundant, but I think it's important that we review it. We're going to go back to our homepage. We've created a profile previously. We're going to come in here. We're going to open that profile. I'm going to type in the last name, provided we've got one athlete with that last name, and I click search. I'm ready to go. Definitely want to make sure I've got a current weight up here at the top left and a current height. The first thing I want to do, guys, is highlight my first sight point from the list, which is our tricep. And then I'm going to apply gel to the device. I just use a couple of pumps. You don't need a ton of gel. The objective here is, simply to make sure that the device ends up sliding nice and easy on the skin surface. Again, I realize this is not my tricep, but without pressing the button, I want to go to our point. We can pull up that reference if you need to, and I'm going to just spread the gel there. Next, I want to lift the device off of the skin, and I'm going to press the button on this device twice. Instead of manually clicking on this measure point button, you can be relatively hands-free with your athlete. So I would apply the gel, lift the device off of the skin. I'm going to press the button twice. It's just click, click. I'm going to go back to my point, and using all 4 of those bullet points, good angle, firm pressure, and so forth, I'm now going to press and hold the button down, and I'm sliding the device through my point, not deviating more than 1/2 inch outside of it. 3 or 4 seconds, let go. No need to double click. The measurement is already engaged. You can see on my screen it's asking for a second measurement. So I usually don't even take the device off the skin. I just quickly navigate back to the start, press and hold the button down the entire time. Nice, comfortable speed, guys. You can see I'm not moving really fast. 3 or 4 seconds, let go, okay? And so the software is going to prompt you for 2 measurements. Don't panic, okay? If it asks you for more than 2, it's actually a good thing. It ends up kicking out the incongruent reading and taking the average of the 2 closest readings. In my case, as you saw, it simply asks for 2, and then it automatically navigates us to the next site that we want to measure. So really, it's a repeat of that same process. I might pull up my reference for my Scap if I need to, but I'm going to reapply gel. Usually between site points, I add more gel. So again, realizing I can't get behind my back here, if this were the Scap, same process. We're going to spread our gel. We're going to lift the device off of the skin. We're going to press the button twice, click, click. Go back to my skin surface, flush and perpendicular, firm pressure. Press and hold the button. Would be a side-to-side movement here. 3 or 4 seconds, let go. I might be going a little bit faster than 3 or 4, but you guys get the idea. We'll repeat. Okay. And it navigated us to the waist. So one thing about the waist, if we pull up that illustration, it's slightly deceiving. It almost looks as if the device is over here, but you really want to be cognizant that it's right next to the umbilicus rather than, over here to the side. Again, same type of process. I'll add some gel. We're going to spread our gel there. Try to keep it, flush and perpendicular. Lift the device off the skin, click, click. Side to side movement here. Nice and smooth and easy. All right. Okay, so we've navigated through all 3 of the sites. Pretty smooth process. It doesn't take very long. Agree? Okay. So when you're done navigating through the sites, you're going to notice that it gives us a percentage of body fat below the table as well as the minimum wrestling weight. But we're not quite done yet. Here's the second thing that you want to do. So I would certainly write this down. I would write down perform minor analysis with the ultrasound signal graph for each site point. And I'll repeat that, I know it's a mouthful. You want to perform minor analysis with the ultrasound signal graph for each site point we measured. Perform minor analysis, the ultrasound signal graph for each site point that we measured. So what do I mean by that? It's really kind of common sense thinking. I just want to take a brief moment and go back up to the first site point that I measured, which is our tricep. We're going to highlight that. We're going to pull up our ultrasound signal graph here. And we just want to make sure that the software identified the correct fat muscle boundary peak. And for your purposes and mine, guys, it's the first strong dominant peak, okay? Within this graph, we see various peaks, right? We see a very strong pronounced peak here, which is the correct peak. We see that this yellow is 6.3 millimeters of fat. The pink is a representation of muscle thickness, although that can fluctuate. Your focus is solely on the fat thickness. So when I take a look at this graph, I can clearly see that the software identified the correct peak. For your own knowledge, these other peaks, they represent various changes within tissue. This last one is a reflection off of this humerus bone. When we measure, we're sending a beam of ultrasound signal through that tissue, and it reflects off various tissue boundaries or interfaces. And again, the first strong dominant one is what we're really after here. So there's nothing that I need to do. I can look at this graph, I'm good to go. Frankly, this is something you don't want to negate, but I want to give you a couple of hypothetical scenarios that may come up. This is the reason why you want to perform this analysis. So if we pull up the Scap, same type of process here. We see very similar analysis, right? That first peak was selected. I'm just going to move the peak over here, okay? We already looked at the tricep. We're good to go. We get to the scapula. Right away, this should be a red flag. Why? For two reasons. Typically, the values of the fat thickness with the tricep and scap are relatively similar. You can see that this is giving a value of 24, which automatically shouldn't make sense. But visually speaking, we can see that here's our first strong peak, right? But we would need to make an adjustment with this. Right away, this should be a red flag. Something isn't right with this. So the signal is what it is. We would need to fix this, and we simply take our mouse and we click on that first strong peak. In most cases, you won't have to do this. It gets back a lot of times with poor technique where you see this kind of fluctuation happen. So we're good to go here. Then we get to the waist. Now, I did this on purpose because I wanted to tie in lean versus default. And I promised you I'd provide more clarity, because when you make that designation and you create that profile with your athlete, when you select lean, what that's actually telling the software to do, guys, is look for a strong peak somewhere between 3 millimeters and 10. Because kids that are lean, adults for that matter, they're typically sub 10 in terms of a fat thickness in their abdomen. If you choose default, all that's really telling the software to do is identify a peak beyond 10. It's really the first strong dominant peak beyond 10, which is actually this one. Now, I did this as a hypothetical, created this profile. This guy was designated as lean. So point in case, common sense would tell you if I'm your wrestler, I'm not sub 10, okay? So what we would need to do in this instance, knowing that your wrestler has some excess fat, we need to identify the first strong peak beyond 10. We just click on that. In other words, you can manually override a measurement. It should be a really simple process. As a quick review, lean kids are sub 10. 10 might be the absolute cutoff. Now, I want to kind of expand a little bit more on that. Let's talk about some of your heavyweight kids, okay? You know, this x-axis is our thickness depth. And I like to use 25 as a reference point. So some of your heavier kids, bigger kids that are carrying considerable adipose tissue in the abdomen, more than likely, guys, their measurements are going to exceed 25. 25 millimeters is an inch inside the body. Outside the body in terms of a visual cue or reference, it's really a 2-inch fold of fat. Very similar to a Skindex caliper in that regard, for those of you that are familiar with calipers or perhaps used them in the past. So I want to give you a solution. This is not part of your typical protocol, but it's something that had come up with another school. This gentleman calls and says, I have one kid, he's 5'11" and weighs 360, really big guy. And he said that on the graph, it was reading like 43 millimeters, which immediately made sense to me after he kind of described this student athlete, knowing that kids that are carrying considerable tissue are exceeding 25 down the scale here. You can always cross-reference any measurement by performing an image scan. I'm going to walk you through this process, but in the event that you're not confident or you have a really large kid, we can click on the Scan tab. And by the way, if you navigate to a different tab, after you've conducted your measurements, it's going to prompt you to save them. So just make sure that you've performed minor analysis. A scan is a little bit different than a measurement. We want to be consistent with the sight point, but instead of moving the device side to side here, I'm actually going to be just sliding it over the course of 3 or 4 inches in one direction. But let's just say we wanted to cross-reference. I'm going to apply more gel. I want to be consistent with my sight point. We're going to start there and just spread the gel. You can see at the top left, we have that enable scan button. Same as the measure point button. We can utilize the button on the device. Click, click to enable that scan. I'm going to go to my sight point, flush and perpendicular, firm pressure. Press the button and hold it down. And I'm just sliding this thing in one fluid motion. And it takes about 5 seconds is all. This produces a 2-dimensional cross-section. So I'll preface my explanation with this. The white signal bands that we see in the image, you want to think of them as being exactly the same thing as these peaks that we see in this 1-dimensional measurement. So the sight point measurements are 1D, the scans are 2D. So the white signals in the image are the exact same thing as these peaks. So in terms of interpreting the image, your thought process is really identical to the analysis that we talked about here. Number one, we know that this student is carrying excess fat, right? So in this measurement, we know we're looking for the first strong peak beyond 10. I'm coming in at 16.5 here. So if we go back to the scan, the only difference, notice our thickness depth is on this x-axis. In the image, it's on the vertical y-axis, okay? So we're kind of peering inside the body with the cross-section. So your thought process is the same. So I can start over here on the left. This is my focus on this left side. Why? Because we're at the sight point as soon as we press that button, right? And we start to render an image. If we started from 0 up at the top, knowing that this wrestler has excess fat, we're looking for the first deeper dominant band of signal. And just like the peaks that we saw in the 1D measurement graph, it's a very strong band of signal. You can't miss it here. And so just at first glance, I came in 16.5, right? If we go back here, sure enough, if I glance at the scale, I know I'm in the ballpark. But we can take it a step further. What I like to do is once I've identified this band, you can see that vertically, there's really a thickness to it. And I'll come off the left, maybe 1/4 of an inch or so, and try to split the difference of that with my mouse. And I'm just doing a left click and drag. The box doesn't need to be long or big. It could be thin, short. But I want to go all the way to the top. Notice below the image is exactly what I measured. I measured it at 16.5. Just to show you the level of accuracy with the system. So the images, you can't refute them, very similar to looking at an x-ray. But getting back to the case scenario with the larger kid. So I told the assessor, I'm pretty confident he is at 43. Can you run an image on him? So we did. And when we looked at that image, we knew that we were looking for a strong band of signal past 25. That was a given, because this kid certainly had more than a 2-inch fold of fat. Sure enough, this band was way down here at 43. So let me show you the solution if you ever run into a case like this. You're going to do what I just showed you. You would identify the band of signal, knowing that this is a larger athlete. We'll just pretend for a moment that this band is way down here. We would do our left click and drag on the band. And again, if we look below the box, we see the value, but right next to that, to the right, is this to measure button. So here's the solution. We can click to measure, and then we can select the site point that we want that value transferred to. In this case, it would be the waist. And now, if we go back to the Measure tab, we've input that value, it reconfigured that gentleman's percent body fat. I know it's a lot to kind of wrap your head around, and this portion of it, again, it's not typical of your everyday protocol. It's an anomaly, kind of an outlier. So again, boils down to technique, common sense minor analysis. Once we've done that, you can trust the results. And then we can move forward. So we finished this guy. We can go back to our home tab. I'm going to save our measurements. We can open up a new student and begin the assessment. Or if you do it in real time, you just create a profile there. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of other things. I wanted to talk about trends for a minute. Pretty self-explanatory. I mean, you can look at progress or regression over time with regard to their weight, which is this blue line. Percent BF is the red. So you got a couple visuals here. This bottom graphic are the site point measurements that we did. So we can look at trending over the course of time there. Now, the show data button is where all the information for this athlete is kept. Now, in talking with the schools, 99% of them want to be able to extract or export a report with all their kids rather than this individual profile. But I did want to just show you this. If for some reason your team doctor, your coach, what have you, AD, wanted an individual stats, if you click that show data button within a profile, you can click the save data to CSV and be able to export that. Most people, when they're done assessing all their kids, they just want to pull that same report for all of them. So what you're going to do is you're going to navigate up here to profiles, up in your Apple menu. You're going to go to group summary, and immediately it would pull up all the kids in your database with their stats. You got the date of assessment, height, weight, percent, minimum wrestling weight, and then the values for the site points that you measured. And then same scenario, you're going to click Save Data to File, and you're good to go. So you'll have that information. Getting back to recategorizing kids into a new year, super simple. Let's say next year rolls around and you want to create a group for 2021 as an example. What you'd have to do is open up each kid's profile, and you're going to go up here to Profiles, and then you're going to select Modify. If you lose a student, you can also delete their profile. But we're going to go to Modify. You can see our group here. If you want to categorize them into a different year, we'll say 2023, just so I can show you how you would do it. You click New Group, and then perhaps the name of your school, or if you want to keep it even simpler, just the year. And then we would update that profile. Then, if we go to Group Summary next year, up here at the top left is our group ID. Just select that particular year. And so all those kids would be in a brand new year. Don't necessarily have to do that, but it might be a better way to organize things for you. That's really the crux of it. Pretty simple to use. Obviously, it's a new tool for you. I would suggest, playing around with it a little bit, but, definitely not hard. In most cases, you shouldn't have to make too many adjustments with the signal, but I would not negate that minor analysis step. You definitely want to take a look at those graphs just to be sure. And if you have to, you could always perform a scan. I hope it was helpful. Please feel free to follow up with us via email. I want to wish you the best of luck with the season, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
you.
Take care.